when chip carving, we know that we need to pay attention to the top surface that we leave uncut, the lines that we make, whether it's thin ridges like this, making those crisp and straight, or the negative space between chips that we leave, like between these triangles. Want to make sure those are always even and straight. But also important to keep in mind is the lines in the bottom of the chips that we carve out, and these lines that the tip of the knife makes as you remove that wood. And that line's created by the, in this case, the two sides of the chip where the knife is at the deepest part. On the two sides of that chip come together and form that line. And same as the top parts, we want to make sure that it's symmetrical, that it's even, and that it's in the right place, forms the right shapes. So some shapes, like these simple triangle, square, circle, those are pretty easy to understand where the lines are going to be and where the deepest part of the chip is. And it's kind of intuitive since they're so symmetrical, since they're familiar, we understand that they're going to be in the middle of everything. But what about for less regular shapes, like some of these? There's a trick that I use for some of these. Eventually you kind of get used to it, but for novel shapes like these two, it can be hard to figure out where the deepest part's going to be, exactly what all the bottom ridges are going to look like, what those lines are going to be that get created. So this is a method that I've used to help me understand that. And basically what you do is you start with one of the pointy parts that's on the outside of the chip. So, on this one, that wouldn't count. That's toward the inside. We want the points that are pointing outside away from the chip. And so start with a pencil at one of those and draw into the chip that you're going to cut out, and draw a line that stays evenly away from the two lines that form that point. So I want to make sure that this line is exactly halfway between these two lines, and keep going until you hit another line. So just like that, and I'll do the same thing on this side. Again, making sure that line stays halfway between the two lines forming the point. And so now we can see where they cross is going to be either the deepest part or a locally deep part. And then when I come up here and do the same thing, this is going to be a longer one, keeping that evenly spaced between those, and you'll see that actually will cross through that same point, which makes sense because it's still a symmetrical triangle. And so now we know that this is the deepest part, and we've got some extra lines. So basically what we can do is, starting from the part of the line that we drew up until where they meet, we'll keep that, and then you can erase everything on the other side of where they met. And what remains is going to be the shape that the knife makes, the deepest part of the chips. And that's where you want the knife blade to go to on everything. If you go too deep, you're going to undercut. If you don't go down to that line, then you're going to have to make multiple passes, and the chip won't come out. So then we can go ahead and cut this out and see that. So now my knife blade is right down at that deepest part, and so I'll come up following this other line now. So now I've basically made those 2/3 of that bottom line. And then when I come to do this one, I want to follow that same cut that I just made at the end, and again ending up at that point with the tip, and then coming out along that one. So then for the last one, just following those two cuts that you just made, and there's that shape that we just drew. It's a long one coming down there, and they meet right there in the middle. So it works for other weird shapes too. This is not too uncommon for chip carving, this kind of double crescent thing. So we'll do the same thing. Start at one of those outward facing points, keep this line halfway between those two outer lines until we hit another line. So we'll stop there. Do it from this part, And you'll notice because this one is curving more than this one, it draws this center line down a little bit toward this side. And so then this one's easy. Since it's symmetrical on top and bottom, we just draw a straight line that way. And so then again, with the extra pieces, we can remove those. Now we see we're going to have a base of the chip that has a bendy part. The deepest part's right there. It's going to come back out, and then a straight line right there. So again, we can see that same shape that we just drew, with the deepest part right there, and this straight line coming out. So what about a shape like this? Let's see what happens on this one when we follow that same technique. We'll split, and sometimes this gets a little bit tricky as these lines diverge and get further away. It's hard to tell exactly what's evenly between them, but that's okay. I can just stop here, and I know that when I come this way, I'm gonna end up with this one intersecting right there, but following the same general principle of trying to split those two lines. So in this case, we can see we have two intersections that are removed from each other. So here we had this line intersecting. It was a three-way intersection. Here we've got just two-way intersections. And when that happens, what's going to end up happening is we have these are in fact the deepest parts, but then there's this other ridge at the bottom that's going to follow at that same depth. So we'll connect those in the same way that we connected the other ones, following halfway between these two lines now. So that's going to form this curvy line that starts and ends at those deepest points. So there's that first deep point, keeping that knife at that same depth until I get to here, and then draw that out. And it's a big chip, so it doesn't come out all at once, but get rid of some of this wood in here, and we can see what those inside ridges look like. So you can see here's the one deepest part here, here's the other deepest part, and that curved line that connects those two halfway between the two sides. And these last two shapes are probably not as random and miscellaneous as you might think. I actually got them from this hummingbird here and this another hummingbird design. Those are real shapes that I used in those. So I'll save carving these, but we can follow the same process to see what that's going to do. So in this case, we'll start here at the top. And because this one's straight and this one curves, this line's actually going to have a little bit of a curve to it. So we'll just go that far. And then come from the bottom here. Again, halfway between those two lines. And now this is the same outside edge, so now I need to stay halfway between this line and this line. So it's going to bend it more this way. And then now bringing it back the other way. And we have one more outside pointer here, so we'll draw this line between that. So now we can see we're going to have two relatively deep points, one here in this kind of semicircle area with a line coming out here, and one right here with that line coming out sideways. And we can see on this hummingbird that that's what we have. We've got this line that kind of runs along the center of the overall picture with a deep point here and a line coming out, and a deep point here and that line coming out. And for this last one with the hummingbird head, so even though this one's highly irregular, we're going to end up with basically one deepest point right here. And then it's kind of a distorted triangle is how it ends up being as far as the geometry of the inside of the chip. And so again, we can see that here with these one crevice there, one there, and then this one coming all the way out the beak. So I hope that helps to understand how you can figure out the bottom lines and deepest part of any irregular chips that you're working on.